And thanks for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be talking with our friends at AT&T. One thing that the U.S. community does want to do for integrated reporting is demonstrate how it can be done in the U.S. And so an iconic company like AT&T provides, I don't want to put Ben and Ashley on the spot here, but provides one of the better examples, that we can look to moving forward. It's a true journey that they're on. And so I'm excited to hear what they have to say. Please do submit questions to the chat. And if we can pull them in initially, then we will. Otherwise, we can wait until the second half of the discussion after Ben and Ashley have shared some of their original thoughts. So it is my pleasure to. I'm still not sure about that. Sorry, Siri's telling me it's not sure about something. I don't know what I said. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Ben Kruse and Ashley Ord from AT&T's ESG Reporting and Insights team. So if you don't mind, Ben and Ashley, I'll just hand over to you for a brief introduction of both of you, and then we can get right to it.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. And thanks, Mary and the broader team. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. And just by introduction, so I'm Ben Kruse. I'm currently the Director of Global ESG Reporting and Insights at AT&T. Our team has responsibility for all of AT&T's global proactive ESG reporting. Also our engagement with the major ESG assessment organizations, with a very strong investor focus there on helping collect our data and provide an analysis on our level of disclosure and performance. We also work very, very closely with our investor relations team, helping them field ESG inquiries from our major investors and such, and looking at strategies to help tell our ESG story to that important stakeholder group. And Ashley, I'll toss it to you as well.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for having us on. I'm Ashley Ord. I report to Ben as a manager and help him with everything that he just said, but then also lead our rating and rankings engagement, and then also have responsibility for like some disclosures, so TCFD, CDP, and then our response to Dow Jones.
Great. And Alex, maybe before we get going again, I think you touched on this a second ago, and I just kind of wanted to underscore it as well. I think this is a journey, for everyone, right? And so, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to tell AT&T's story. I would say that we are, kind of our first year into our directional alignment with the integrated reporting principles and the concepts of integrated thinking and so on, but really look forward to digging into that and discussing how, reporting can be more than just for reporting's sake, that it can really be a change agent and an opportunity to drive different ways of thinking across the business. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but I just wanted to set the stage just a bit.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Ben. You kind of took the initial question right from me before I go into the reports themselves. But before we go into, so the first thing I do want to talk about is you did mention that there was sort of an initial step forward over the last 12 months. But do you mind just giving us a bit of the history of AT&T's non-financial sustainability ESG reporting, dating back to way back when? And then it'll help provide a bit more context before we launch into this most recent reporting.
Sure, absolutely. So AT&T has been reporting non-financial information since about the 2007 timeframe. So it's a pretty mature program. Since that period, we've been aligning with the GRI framework and standards. A couple of years ago, as we started to see the development of SASB ratification of those standards, we started testing that internally, began to, start introducing those disclosures into some of our reporting before we even ever issued a standalone SASB report. Kind of took the same approach with TCFD as well. We began, looking at those disclosures, through the lens of CDP, as CDP integrated TCFD into their framework and assessment. And then now, of course, issue a standalone TCFD report. So in all, AT&T currently aligns to and 7 of the major ESG reporting frameworks. Again, GRI, SASB, TCFD, the UN SDGs, the Global Compact. I put CDP climate in there as well as a dual assessment and a framework. And of course, what we're here to talk about today are directional alignment, with the integrated reporting principles. So Again, we've been a long way on this journey, but it's an evolving space, and there's always somewhere more to go.
Thanks, Ben. So if we return to this step that you made last year, and I'm happy to scroll through at your direction the two reports we have on the screen. So this is a previous report, which is dated 2021. And it covered the 2020 reporting period. And then this is the more recent one, dated 2022, which of course covers the 2021 reporting period. So what would you say were the main developments worth noting when comparing the two reports?
Sure. So I'd say, if we look at, just talk about the 2021 report and even maybe, a couple years prior to that, right? I think we had a lot of internal conversation about, what is the right audience, for this reporting. I think for a number of years, and I think most folks would agree that there's kind of been an evolution that, what was, CSR primarily focusing on, highlighting corporate responsibility programs, volunteerism initiatives, those sorts of things has now evolved to a much broader scope of topics, as ESG has risen in prominence and interest from the investor community. So, one of the things that we try to do is figure out, okay, really, who is the primary audience for this reporting? And we really did focus, on that investor community. Not that what we're putting out there isn't of interest to broader stakeholders, right? But again, realizing that investors are probably the primary consumers of this portion of our reporting. At AT&T, we have other teams, in our corporate responsibility function and across the company that deal with more, real-time, corporate communications and so on. And so we felt that might be a better avenue to tell some of our, CSR related stories. And so that kind of mindset helped us start to make this pivot toward ESG and again, that kind of investor focus. But I think, one of the most notable differences as we look at these two reports, side by side in terms of the content in them, is that we've made a pivot from issues-based reporting, looking at, our most material topics, again, largely rooted, in GRI guidelines for a materiality assessment, and looking at what are our most material topics. Of course, what is AT&T's managerial and programmatic approach to those issues? What does our executive and board oversight, of those issues look like, right? And I think that's still a very important narrative to tell. What are the issues that are important? Why are they important to AT&T? What are we doing about it? What levels of oversight do we have and such? That's still very important. But as we were, starting to, read more and learn more about, integrated reporting and what was happening outside the U.S. and what even some of our U.S. peers were beginning to do or how they were beginning to tell the story, we wanted to evolve that and take it to the next level. And so the way we viewed, the integrated reporting, framework and principles is it would help us tell not only how we're doing it, why it's important, but the so what. So what I'm alluding to is the impact piece of it, right? And so we pivoted from this issues-based approach to a stakeholder-based approach. And I don't know, Alex, if you want to flip to the value creation model. I won't go into that, but it's kind of a nice visual representation, or at least the right-hand side of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just jump in a second here. So what we mean by issues-based versus stakeholder-based is you can see here, this is the previous report, and the report is organized simply reporting on issues, human capital management, DEI, climate change. They're reported as a sequence of things that AT&T has addressed. And I think what they've done that's in a step toward the integrated reporting framework is if you consider the integrated reporting framework's description of a business, it really looks at, okay, how does a business rely on environmental and social capital or resources to create value and then impact those types of capitals, which can be substituted with stakeholder groups in most cases. So what they're doing is situating the discussion of issues management or ESG issues management in the context of corporate value creation and adding that extra layer of logic. And so, yeah, Ben, I'll now go to the value creation model. Sorry to
Oh, no, no, very, very
Okay.
well said. I appreciate that additional context. And so
Right.
again, right, I think one way to think about this is, this organization by stakeholder group, in effect, lets any of those stakeholder groups, within their section kind of see themselves in our reporting. In other words, what does that mean specifically to them? There's still a discussion within those sections of the major important material topics, because those are still the issues that we're dealing with, and we're still talking about how we're managing that and what we're doing programmatically to manage that. But what we've tried to highlight here again is the outcomes and the impacts from that work. So I don't know, Alex, if we might scroll just a little bit more. I don't know that I have a particular section in mind, but maybe one that kind of shows some of our impacts here. So, I think this is potentially, a decent view to stop on, right? So certainly, if you think of AT&T's core business, of connectivity, helping to address the digital divide. So helping provide connectivity for, underserved communities, both in metropolitan areas, perhaps even in rural areas, is a major focus of our business and a major opportunity for our business. It also represents some major commitments that we've made publicly. So again, perhaps more than we've done in years past, we are representing visually in the report, major commitments that we've made, such as our $2 billion digital divide commitment over, a 3-year period. Impacts that we've had in the community, providing, Wi-Fi hotspots to students, distributing computers, and so on. And I think it's probably also worth noting, as we are looking at this page, I don't think that companies should think that I only want to highlight an impact if it's a huge number, right? AT&T is a huge corporation, and we're talking about 40,000 hotspots or 7.7 thousand computers. That's still a valuable impact to that part of the community and that particular stakeholder group. So let me pause here a little bit, Alex, and see if you want to drill down on anything, or Ashley as well, if you have any additional points to highlight as well.
Go ahead, Alex.
No. I'm happy to take you to the next question, but I do want to get your thoughts as well.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No worries. So I think anytime we work with companies to, try to move them in this direction, there's always a bit of who else is doing this, or how do I know it's the right way, and the like. And so can you shed some light on how it's been received internally and externally?
Yeah, no, I think, I think broadly, it's been, received, very, very favorably. I will say, and I may be jumping ahead in terms of, how we want to take this conversation. I think one of the challenges that we ran into as we were putting this together was, getting people organized around this thought of impact. I think, maybe unexpectedly, as we were looking into some of these stakeholder groups and impacts resulting from some of our programmatic work, we realized, okay, we may not be thinking about these programs from an impact lens. We may not be quantifiably measuring, outcomes and stuff in that way. And so I think that's been an interesting surprise and outcome of this work. Certainly, I think people have been happy with the report, but I think, the real impact, of the reporting work has been getting people to think a little bit differently. And as we started this journey and started having conversations with Alex and others, many people talked about, the integrated reporting journey is almost like a multi-year or even a 3-year timeline. And I'll admit that didn't really make sense to Ashley and I. We thought, okay, why can't we just rip off the Band-Aid? Let's dive in and do it. And I think you can, and that's what we tried to do. But I think now in hindsight, what people were recognizing is you may not be able to get there or as far as you want to get in the first year. So don't be afraid to recognize that it's a multi-year journey. And what I mean by that is there are going to be parts of the business that just don't look at their programs or their work through an impact lens. And so part of that's getting them to understand why that's valuable, what sort of metrics we might want to begin capturing and begin, managing against, and so on. And that's the real value of this work, in my opinion, is that you're getting the business to think differently. You're getting the business to think with the end in mind versus just telling investors and other stakeholders, what you're doing.
And so in terms of the business thinking differently, and everyone, if you have any thoughts or any bubbles, any contributions, please do either, raise your hand or pop something into the chat. Sorry, there we go. All right, Bob, I will put that into the program. In terms of the business thinking differently, do you want to step to the proxy statement now, or do you want to provide more thoughts on where to next for the ESG report?
Sure. Let me touch on kind of the where to next, and then we can certainly, pivot to the proxy, conversation, right? Because I mean, they're certainly correlated. And so, again, I think as we look to what next, keeping in mind this is AT&T's first year, our first step toward integrated thinking and integrated reporting. So I think our activities now in the off season, and you can see that we've just finalized this year's reporting in July. Now's when we roll up our sleeves and do the work. Now's when we go back to the business and start uncovering these opportunities to get thinking about, okay, where might we not be measuring impact in a given area? Where can we look for new opportunities to disclose impact or uncover impact? And again, some of those things probably don't exist today and are going to have to be built. And so that's where I think it's important to realize that in the best sense, an ESG reporting team isn't just a group that does this one time a year activity. It's unidirectional, and it's about telling the story outward. It's really it's really about then working in the off season inside the business to move the needle and to change the way of thought. And that's much easier said than done.
Definitely. And so I think if I do just want to, before we go off, think about things like digital divide, something that, I think is stronger in this report, even though we're not quite there totally with stakeholder outcomes and impact and the like. There are some strong proof points of case studies of how the impact has occurred. And also just this, when you give a sense of when you're okay enough to set goals and targets, it shows that you have a strategic direction that you want to take whatever the issue is. And I think that's a pretty key difference to the disclosure from previously, which we look at the digital divide section. It was challenging to find and easily identify the strategic direction forward in terms of goals and targets, even though there were some that had already been made at that time. And so I think in terms of someone who's quickly scanning the report, enhancing that communication in terms of really bringing out the strategic direction, I think is a good way forward for this report in particular.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, seeing the two side by side, it reminds me of, a conversation that we had with our chief sustainability officer. And I think the point, from that is, well, aren't we already doing some of this today? And so my takeaway there is, I would challenge, companies to not think that, this pivot toward, integrated reporting and integrated thinking is that drastic potentially of a change from what you've been doing in the past. It's an enhancement of it, right? But again, we're still telling, it's still much of the same story to tell. It's still much of the same, programmatic work and managerial approach and so on, right? It is, to Alex's point, shining a brighter light on public goals, shining a brighter light on the outcomes and the impacts and so on. So again, I don't know, Alex, if you would agree with that, perspective, right? But I don't want someone to think, oh my gosh, this is unapproachable for us because it's such a dramatic shift from where we've been in the past. Does that feel right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on the organization. I think there are some, a lot of organizations have, started with GRI because that was their first, and then they then sort of layer over SASB, but then they don't quite take that next conceptual step to say, okay, SASB has this value creation lens, whereas GRI is more about impact and issues management. So how do I need to pivot the narrative so that it suits both audiences as well? And that's where I think, the integrated reporting framework, even if you're not creating an integrated report, like we're not talking about overhauling your 10K here, right. But it's more about making sure that the ESG reporting can best serve both types of audiences, given that the audience has shifted from where it was in 2007 when you first started, to your initial point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's also important to add that several, rating and rankings organizations are also measuring the impact. And so, we look at that kind of like on our off cycle reporting, after we did this report, but, working with the business to look at those impacts, like on Dow Jones, the human capital management, where you need to look at the return of your investment on the training development programs that you have, and having the business think that way. It's just another avenue to push them into that kind of integrated thinking.
Thanks, Ashley. And I mean, it is good to see that also AT&T is using those investor requests in a strategic way rather than just thinking, oh my God, it's another thing. Here's another one, because they are, relentless and never ending. But so you might as well use them to your benefit.
No, truly, Alex, and not to pivot too long on that topic, right? But I think, again, thinking of the ESG reporting function as not this unilateral activity, but this hub, to an extent. There is a real effort, and a goal to take insights, from those assessment organizations, from those questions that are being asked, kind of as a proxy to stakeholders and investors, and getting a, benchmarking, where are we scoring well, where are we not? And if we're not, who's demonstrating best practice there, what can we learn? And then how do we work back in the business to either enhance disclosure, enhance a program, enhance a policy, maybe, shed light on an opportunity for a needed program or so on. And again, it's taking the whole reporting process 360. So.
Thank you both. So just to conclude, like the initial discussion, the initial interview, before we get to questions from our guests, from our group, I want to talk about the proxy statement, because this is a good one. This is a SEC legal document. Like, what does it mean to integrate ESG here? And if I've got 2021 on the left and this most recent one on the right. There's all your compensation. So if you just take me through, like, here's what it was in 2021, right? A 4-pager standalone section of corporate responsibility. You mind summarizing, what changes were made in 2022, and I can go through that, and why they were made and the impact that's had internally?
Sure. So I would say at the highest level, right? There has for a number of years been a recognition of the importance of ESG and wanting to commit real estate, in the proxy to talk about, what we're doing, high level governance in this space and so on. But one of the challenges that we've had over the last couple of years is trying to figure out what was the right content. And what I mean by that is, at least at AT&T, we kind of have what I'll characterize as 3 main ESG reporting pillars. So one of which was, the ESG summary documents we looked at a moment ago, kind of our capstone reporting, telling our top level narrative and strategic approach and so on. We support, that 50-ish page document with a collection of 20 plus what we call issue briefs, that are, aligned primarily to the GRI, framework, very deep dive into our programmatic and managerial approach and so on, really get into the tactical weeds of what we're doing on that issue. And so, for the last couple of years, as we've looked at the proxy, we kind of drew from both of those legs of the stool, if you will, from the summary and from the issue briefs to build out this content. There really wasn't anything unique here. And so as we look to the 2022 proxy, one of the things that we wanted to do was kind of fill in that third leg and give stakeholders, again, probably primarily investors, a place to go if they really want to understand what does the board and executive oversight of these issues look like. And so the great news is we really had a warm reception from our corporate secretary's office and legal team, who puts together the proxy in helping us really expand the section. We went from approximately 4 pages to approximately 10. And now we take a very, very deep dive, again, looking at our most, material ESG topics, but talking about, the level of board oversight, the executive oversight, how frequent are those meetings, what sorts of things are discussed relative to that topic, in those meetings, We do still, take the latitude of including some narrative to just paint a better story, so it's not completely dry. So there are some highlights, some programmatic details and such in there. But at a high level, Alex, that's the direction that we try to take. So now we think of our three-legged, school of reporting or stool of reporting, the ESG summary, our very, very tactical and detailed issue briefs, and now this proxy content that talks about, executive and board oversight of these issues.
Yeah, and I would say also, it seems here like what we've got is, you talk about ESG integration as part of the corporate governance section of the report, as opposed to corporate responsibility being kind of separate to other corporate, the like mainstream corporate governance, if you will, in the report, right? It's kind of actually considered in that narrative and in that description, as opposed to, okay, we've got our, core corporate governance, if you will, and then here's our corporate responsibility thing. And I think that, and are there any stories, any interesting conversations you had internally that you're willing to share?
You know what? I mean,
about getting this in?
Yeah, I mean, with regard to putting together the expanded proxy content, fortunately not. And again, I think one of the positive surprises there, right, was that there really was zero hesitancy, zero pushback to devote, more real estate, if you will, to this information. And so again, I think that speaks to the broader organizations in the company understanding how important this is. I still think there are, opportunities to, we do frame this in such a way that, ESG is integrated throughout the management of the company. And it is in that there are so many different parts of the business that touch the ESG topics, multiple board level committees that have oversight for this work and receive regular reports on it. I think, again, as we continue to evolve, there's an opportunity to better understand and better talk about how ESG metrics are being used for managerial decisions and so on in the business, and maybe get a little bit louder about, highlighting, what some of those are. And again, as we've been on this journey and started pushing the business to tell more of the story, we've uncovered where, okay, maybe we are not, utilizing a particular ESG metric as much for our managerial approach as we are just calculating that to report out on it, right? And so again, I think that's part of the value of this work here, right, is to shed light on those situations and try to move the needle there. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that kind of gets to what you were asking about. But again, fortunately, pleasantly surprised that there was not pushback on expanding this narrative.
Thanks, Ben. So before we get to the open question component of today's webinar, is there anything that you want to cover off on, Ben or Ashley? Otherwise, we've got some questions here in the chat that we'll be getting to.
Yeah, Ashley, anything from you?
Nothing on my end.
Cool. The only thing I might say, Alex, just to kind of wrap up is just, again, I would encourage organizations not to be, fearful of this approach, to recognize that it is very much an evolving space and a multi-year journey, and don't be afraid to start telling this story, even if you think that you might not be far enough along in the integrated thinking or integrated reporting journey. Don't let that be a hindrance. I would encourage everyone to take that step and begin pivoting their narrative or expanding their narrative from the way they might be telling the story today.